this is Allie from Kidzu, and I have Mallory here as well. Today, we are going to celebrate National Chemistry Week by making some pumpkin bread. Now you might be wondering, what does baking have to do with chemistry? Well, baking is chemistry. As we go along with our recipe, you're going to see that all of these ingredients are undergoing a chemical reaction. As we go along with our recipe, I'm going to talk a bit about the chemistry that's happening while we're baking. And if you want some written instructions for this recipe, you can go to the Kids in Your Kitchen section of the Kidzu website. Okay, first we're going to mix our dry ingredients. So we're going to take a medium-sized bowl here, and we're going to add 2 1/3 cups of flour. Now flour has something called protein in it, which are really small particles that we can't see. When we bake something, the protein sticks together or bonds, and they form something called gluten. And the gluten is what gives the loaf its structure. It's like the framework for the loaf. Okay, now we are going to add some salt and spices for flavor. So 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Pretty good. Okay, and 1/4 teaspoon of cloves. 1 teaspoon of cinnamon. Okay, and 3/4 teaspoon of ground coriander. Okay, now for a very important ingredient. We're going to add 1.5 teaspoons of baking soda. Now, why is baking soda so important? Well, to explain that, I'm going to show you a mini experiment that will demonstrate what happens when we add baking soda to our baked goods. I have a bowl with some baking soda in it. Now, baking soda is also called sodium bicarbonate. It's a type of substance that's called a base. Now I'm going to add some vinegar. Do you want to put the vinegar in here? Now, vinegar is an acid, which is like the opposite of a base. Oh, what do you notice? There are lots of tiny bubbles. So when we add something acidic or something that's an acid to the baking soda, there's a chemical reaction that releases a gas. It's called carbon dioxide. Now this gas creates little bubbles in the loaf as it bakes. So that's what makes the batter rise up as it bakes and get fluffier or airier. So if we didn't have baking soda in our batter, the loaf would be more solid and hard and not as tasty. Now, there are many ingredients that we can add to baked goods that are acidic. So you can add vinegar, some recipes call for that, but you can also add lemon juice, milk, and buttermilk. They are all acids. So in our recipe, it's actually the pumpkin that's going to provide some acidity. Okay, back to our recipe. Now in a separate clean bowl, we're going to add our sugars. We're going to add 1 cup of the granulated sugar. Now the sugars will make our loaf sweet, but as it's baking, they will also brown and caramelize and make our loaf taste even better. Okay, and we need 1/2 cup plus 2 tablespoons of brown sugar. Good job. Okay, we are going to add 1 14-ounce can of pumpkin puree, and just the plain pumpkin, not the pumpkin pie mix. All right, you want to scrape that in there?
All of it?
Yep, closer if you want. Okay, and we're going to add 2 eggs. You want to crack those? Now, as the batter cooks in the oven, the eggs are going to help to bind the loaf together. So if we didn't have eggs in our loaf, it would be a lot more crumbly, and as you ate it, it might fall apart a little bit in your hands. Oh, this one. Okay, finally we're going to add 1/2 cup of vegetable oil. Now when we're baking using oil or butter, if you were using butter in your recipe, the oil helps to keep what you're baking tender and moist. Now we get to whisk it all together. You can use the mixer if you want. Okay, now we have one more step. We're gonna mix the dry and the wet together. Okay, I'm gonna mix that up again.
It's like feel water under it.
That way it looks like we're just getting it all. Alright, turn it off for now. Okay. And I forgot we also have to add this at the very end. So we're gonna put 1 cup of chocolate chips. And a 1/4 cup of sherry or wine. The original recipe calls for sherry, but I always use wine because that's what I have. Do you want to hold that maybe?
I want to pour it.
You want to pour this in?
Yeah.
Okay. Now if you don't have sherry or wine, you can use water. But you may be wondering why we are adding sherry or wine to the loaf. And there are a couple of reasons why we add alcohol to our baking. It can add flavor. But also, alcohol is volatile. That means it evaporates easily. So when something evaporates, it's turning from a liquid into a gas. Scientists call that a physical reaction. But what happens is when the alcohol is evaporating through the loaf, it's picking up all the flavors of the loaf, and when you're eating it, you're smelling in all those flavors, which makes the flavor become more enhanced or stronger. Okay, so one final mix, and then we'll be ready to bake. All right, so you want to stir that up? Okay, now we're ready to bake. So we're going to divide it into 2 pans.
Can I do that?
Yeah, I have 2 loaf pans here that I've lined with parchment paper. You could also grease it. The parchment paper makes it a lot easier to get your loaf out. All right, I'm gonna help you. We'll kind of work together, okay? That's my oven preheating. We're gonna make this as even as possible. It's kind of hard when your loaf pans aren't the same shape. Looks pretty even, do you think? Just kind of flatten it all out at the top there. And then we're going to bake it at 350 degrees for about 50 to 60 minutes or until a cake tester comes out clean. Okay, our loaves are done and it smells amazing in here. Look at these. Thanks for joining us today. If you'd like some more recipes or other ideas, you can go to the Kids at Home website. You can also follow us on Facebook and Instagram. Bye!